Bless you, good folks. Appreciate the opportunity to see you this morning. Grateful to your pastor for the invitation. And the ultimate challenge in front of us is, do we have an authoritative Bible? You hear an awful lot of talk about relevant Bible study, which is supposed to adjust our understanding of the scripture to our culture. But then whose understanding? Relevant Bible study always means somebody's going to tell you what they think. And you're going to end up following them instead of having an authoritative Bible. If you would go with me to Jeremiah chapter 23, this is not a new problem. You read, I've had the privilege of Dayspring 2 years ago teaching the book of Jeremiah chapter by chapter. And last year teaching Ezekiel chapter by chapter. This year we'll teach Isaiah chapter by chapter. And the biggest part of all three books is God describing his judgment on Judah or Israel. Sometimes a specific message of judgment will take chapters. Now, a lot of folks today don't seem to understand, every single message of judgment, every one, ends with a reminder that God is not done with Israel and God will restore Israel. Every one of them. You always get that. But do you have a ton of information about judgment? And the answer is yes. And this is all going on right at this time. And there are prophecies about future judgment. But in all of those cases, there was judgment happening as these scriptures are being given. And we're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 23, which is a reference to one of these judgments, and see what we can learn from it. You'll see very much in this the priests and prophets who are supposed to be the men of God adjusted revelation to what they wanted it to say. Chapter 23, verse 9. Mine heart within me is broken because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I mean, you look at Jeremiah. He's shaking. I say, what's he shaking? He said, well, first thing you think of is, he said, I'm like a drunken man, like a man whom wine hath overcome. Many a time, I've had to talk to someone under the influence of alcohol, and they could not hold steady under that influence. They shake. Right at this moment, if you looked at Jeremiah, Jeremiah would look like that. But it's not because he had been drinking. It's not because he was under the influence of alcohol or any other stimulant from outside the Bible, outside the body. So what was it? Because of the Lord, because of the words of his holiness. So what happened? He says, I know the words God used. He said, I know the words God said. I know his holiness. And then I look around at where Judah is and how Judah is acting, and I know the result of this behavior. As you go into the book of Deuteronomy extensively, God's given the Old Testament law, he's given direction, and there's chapter after chapter that are called the blessing and cursing chapters, where God says, if you do this, I will curse you. But if you do this, I will bless you. But if you do this, I will curse you. If you do this, I will bless you. But if you do this, I will curse you. But if you do this, I will bless you. Chapter after chapter after chapter. And you see this in Isaiah. You see it in Jeremiah. You see it in Ezekiel, which come in that order. And in these messages about judgment, God is constantly referring to the promises of blessing and cursing in the book of Deuteronomy. It's like, here we are. What do you expect to happen? It's some things obviously predict themselves and forecast themselves. You can look and see. I pastored in inner city Chicago for 11 years. When you get a mayor candidate promising certain things and people getting all excited, I say, you know how that's going to end? You know what the results are of Lori Lightfoot, what she was promising. And then the next mayoral race, you have the number one candidate. You had a good Christian man running for mayor. They had several candidates. A friend of mine was running. He finished fourth. But you had somebody else saying, well, the problem is you weren't liberal enough. Lori Lightfoot wasn't liberal enough, and I'll be more liberal than her, and I'll do this and this and this, and I'll restrict the police more, and I'll do this. And he wins. You know what's coming. They're going through the exact same thing in New York right now, where the leading candidate, likely next mayor of New York, is a combination Marxist Islamicist. You know what's coming, and there are people panicking. Well, a lot of that is our educated guess, even though everything in Chicago happened the way everybody was guessing. Jeremiah's not guessing. He knows. And the reason he knows is because God said, if you do this, I will bless you. If you do this, I will curse you. These are the words of God's holiness. Does God make any promises he doesn't keep? Does he make any promises he can't keep? I occasionally do that. One of my weaknesses has been overscheduling. And there have been a couple times the last year I've had to call folks and say, man, I'm really sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I can't get from here to there. I'm really sorry. Does God make any promises he can't keep? Is there anything too big for him? So look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah is shaking because he knows what God has said. And he knows things will happen exactly the way God said. Okay. Verse 10. For the land is full of adulterers, for because of swearing the land mourneth, the pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up, their course is evil, their force is not right. For both prophet and priest are profane, yea, in mine house have I found their wickedness, saith the Lord. The prophets, whose job it was to deliver revelation to the people. Prophets played a lot bigger role than we tend to think because God gave his revelation through them. Most of the revelation God gave, he did not have written down. In fact, it wasn't until Isaiah that any prophet is instructed to write down the revelation God was giving. And so we sometimes assume that before these men, before the New Testament, folks didn't know much. They knew a lot more than what we think. Cain and Abel both knew how they were supposed to make offerings, even though it hadn't been written down yet. Enoch prophesied of the second coming of Christ. Way back, he's the seventh from Adam. So they were prophets. They were supposed to get up and deliver messages that included inspired revelation of God. And there were priests who were supposed to lead the people in conducting the day-to-day worship. These are supposed to be the men of God. They, of all people, should be the people that are taking seriously what God has said. This is both prophet and priest are profane. Profane means to live as if there was no God. And that's how both the prophet and the priest were living. In other words, they were not bound by any revelation from God. They could make it up as they went along, which is the tragedy of our day. And as a result, Jeremiah says, you could go to the temple itself And in the temple itself, you could find the wickedness of this world. In what are called churches today, in the United States, you can find all the wickedness you could possibly imagine in what are called churches. Verse 12, wherefore their way shall be unto them as slippery ways in the darkness. They shall be driven on, fall therein, for I will bring evil upon them, even the year of their visitation, saith the Lord. He says, the judgment's coming. Judgment is real. You can pretend it's not real, but it's real anyway. You can pretend that God is not in charge. You can pretend God did not say the things that he said. When I pastored in the city of Chicago, I mentioned it. When I first took the pastorate, one of the ladies in church came to me and said, look, my daughter, who's been a part of this church her entire life, longtime member, used to be very faithful, very active, said she's not going to church. She's living with her boyfriend. She said she thinks that people look down on her, so she's not going to church anymore. Well, I'm sure there is some level of people looking down on her. And she said, would you be willing to talk to her? I said, well, I'll talk to her. Of course, she doesn't know me. I show up. This is the first conversation we've ever had, and I hate first conversations like this. I say, your mom asked me to talk to you and all that. She said, listen, let me tell you right up front. She said, no God that I would worship would disapprove of my behavior. Yeah, that's it, exactly. No God that she would worship. The God of the Bible would disapprove. But she's not worshiping a God that disapproves of her behavior. So she's manufactured in her own mind some image of what she thinks God is and what God should be, and expects God to adjust to her. Y'all ready? God does not adjust to us. Okay. Verse 12, wherefore their way shall be unto them as slippery ways in the darkness. They shall be driven on and fall therein. For I will bring evil upon them, even the year of their visitation, saith the Lord. End result of living as if there is no absolute revelation from God is you get judgment. And that can be, of course, cataclysmic type judgment. But it's a lot of other things as well. It's judgment in people's lives. You look at the frustration of people and ungodliness and what they're living with. The old story about, this happened several times. It just happened again recently. Niagara Falls, if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, one of the most impressive waterfalls you'd ever find. And there are iron railings about 5 feet from the edge all around. And on those iron railings, every few feet there's a sign that says, do not get on the other side of this. And yet, it's not at all unusual to see people get on the other side of that to get closer to the edge to get a better picture. But here's the problem. Because of all the spray from the waterfall, that when you get on the other side of those railings, it's slippery. It's wet rock. You can slip on wet rock pretty easily. And so over the years, there have been a number of occasions of people who got on the other side of the rail to take pictures and slipped and fell. And just a recent case, and they posted the picture, there's a picture of this lady on the other side of the rail where she's not supposed to be. She's in a bright red dress, bright red outfit anyway. And then all of a sudden she's gone. Tragic. The force of the bottom of the waterfall is such that if something goes in the water down there, it goes underneath, and often it cannot come back up or be recovered for months or even years. So they do not have this woman's body. But there's a picture of her standing on the other side of the rail, and then she's gone. Now, you could ask about those signs that were trying to regulate her life, trying to tell her you cannot stand on the other side of this rail. Danger, beware. You can be fined for getting on the other side of the rail. And if all that happens is you get fined, you could consider yourself pretty lucky. And there she is. And you could say, well, those signs aren't important. They're not relevant to me in my life because I can handle this. But once you're on the other side of the rail and you slip off and you're plunging to your doom, you don't need to ask and say, how is God going to punish me for this? Lightning's not going to hit you from heaven while you're falling on the way over. You'll be falling on the way over. Okay? Alcohol, drugs, immorality, all kinds of ungodliness. You have to say, how's God going to punish me for this? You're going to live with the result of your sin. That's how he's going to punish you with it. Well, when I was in Chicago, they would have what they called 3 flats there, which was a dwelling and another dwelling on top of that, another dwelling on top of that. And you had 3 families in this one 3 flat. And one of them got to come into church. They'd been saved for a while. But they got in the church I pastored, and they're doing good, and they're inviting their family. And we ended up with everybody in that 3 flat coming to church, except one young man, late teens. He wasn't going to church. That wasn't for him. He came a couple times, but he didn't relate. And one of his biggest problems is that he was so deep into marijuana usage, he would use marijuana every night. He said to calm him down so he'd go to sleep. So how's God going to punish him for that? When he was using marijuana, he couldn't see reality, which is what he was trying to escape from. So one Sunday night after church, I get a panicked call because everybody else in the family is at Sunday night church service. Everybody else in the building's at Sunday night church service. His girlfriend breaks up with him over the phone. And he's so distraught, he runs to the marijuana, which changes his understanding of reality. And while under the influence of marijuana, he goes up on the top of the building, on the roof of the building, ties a rope around his neck, the other end of the rope to the side of the building, and jumps off. When they come home, they find his body hanging from the side of the building. So, man, I wonder how God's going to punish him for using marijuana. He lost his sense of reality. And when you lose your sense of reality, there's just literally no telling what the end result of that can be. Well, verse 13. And I've seen folly in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in Baal, caused my people Israel to err. I've also seen in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery, walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They're all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. So he said, even the very preachers themselves are overcome with immorality and ungodliness, which means not only is their preaching not correct, their example is not correct. Verse 15. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, behold, I will feed them with wormwood, make them drink the water of gall, for from the prophets of Jerusalem is a profaneness gone into all the land. You understand the heart of the problem was the message of the preachers? You ought to thank God you have a church to go to with a Bible-believing preacher that preaches to you from the Word of God, believes what the Word of God has to say, doesn't correct it with his own opinions. Because I promise you, there aren't that many churches like that left. And many of them, not all, but many of them tend to be smaller churches. And the world thinks they're in competition with churches that entertain people and tell them what they want to hear. Well, verse 16. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, hearken not unto the words of the prophets that prophesy unto you. They make you vain. They speak a vision of their own heart and not out of the mouth of the Lord. The preacher's message comes from their own heart. They make it relevant. What they think, how they feel. They adjust it to however it is they want it to be. Okay? That's the scary thing. They have a relevant message, which is just simply how the preacher feels about it. They are no longer bound by an authoritative Bible. You understand both the importance and the challenge of being bound by an authoritative Bible. You may be so spiritual that what I'm about to say doesn't relate to you, but I'm not. Sometimes I find myself disagreeing with the Bible. Now, don't get me wrong. When the Bible and I disagree, it's pretty clear who's wrong. I mean, you got it. But I'll give you an illustration. I'm in Canada, Windsor, Ontario. I'm preaching a meeting in a church. And some people in church come to see me, and they said, Brother Stringer, said there's a radio talk show here in Windsor where the host is an American. And he has a 2-hour talk show. He invites and dares preachers to come on the show and be with him because he loves to tear up preachers. Just rips them apart. So he'll take any preacher. Said, would you be willing to go? I said, sure, I've been yelled at before. They said, well, that's good because we have you scheduled for 2 o'clock. And so I go a few minutes early to meet the guy that's going to be challenging me here on the radio. Turns out he's not just from the United States. He's from Indianapolis, which is where I'm from. He's from the same neighborhood in Indianapolis I was from. He went to the same elementary school I went to 1 year ahead of me. And that elementary school had 1 first grade class, 1 second grade. We had all the same teachers growing up. So we're just sitting talking about the old neighborhood and stuff and getting along great. So we go in the first hour of the show, and he's being real nice, real polite. He's asking me easy questions. Now, the thing about that, on talk shows, being nice and civil is not what sells. Conflict is what sells. So you get a 2-hour show. We go for an hour, 5-minute break. During the break, the station manager calls him in his office. And I'm not stupid. I know what's happening. He's telling him to dial it up a notch. We come back out. Here's the first question and only question of the second hour. Do you believe that when Hitler mercilessly slaughtered the Jews in the Holocaust, they died and went to hell where God was even crueler to them than Hitler had been? That's a fun question to answer on live radio. My answer was, if an independent Baptist dies without trusting Christ, that independent Baptist dies and goes to hell. And if a Jew dies without trusting Christ, a Jew dies and goes to hell. Oh, the phones erupted. People calling in. They're angry. They're mad. They accuse me of being pro-Hitler and pro-Nazi and all kind of things I never said. One guy calls in and he's screaming over the phone at the top of his lungs. Screaming in person is irritating. Screaming over the phone is worse. So he's screaming. He said, you know who deserves to go to hell? He said, you deserve to go to hell. I said, sir, you have no idea how correct you are. I said, that's a wise and profound statement. I absolutely deserve to go to hell, but by the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, I'm not going. Anyway, just one after another called and are angry and all that. So we get to the end of the program. And the guy says, "Why did you do it?" He says, "You knew I set you up. You could have ducked out of the question. You could have changed the topic. You could have softened your answer." He says, "Why did you do it? You knew I was setting you up." I said, "Well, let me share something with you. I don't even like the doctrine of hell. I wish it wasn't true. I wish it didn't exist. If I created the universe, there would be no hell. Because while I'm offended by sin, I'm not that offended." I said, "But I have an authoritative Bible that tells me there is a hell. Who goes there, why they go there, and for whom it is torment for eternity." I said, "It doesn't matter how I feel about it. You got it? I'm not the authority. I have an authoritative Bible." My first pastorate was in a small town. I was the only pastor that lived in town of any kind. There was a funeral home in town, and anytime anybody that didn't have a pastor asked for a preacher for a funeral, the funeral home came to me. I'm preaching all kinds of funerals for people I do not know. And family had gone to Mexico, Cancun on vacation. They left their 17-year-old son at home alone. He had a cocaine party while they were gone, overdosed on cocaine and died. Come back. Turns out the mother was a Christian. She'd grown up in church. She dropped out of church when she married this man who wasn't in church. But she had enough memory of spiritual things. She wanted to preach her at the funeral. She was concerned about heaven and hell. And she told me, she said, her son had never been in church, never heard preaching of any kind, never been confronted with any spiritual truth. End of the funeral. She comes up to me, grabs me, is crying as hard as a human being can cry. She literally soaks the corner of my suit jacket. And all the time she's crying, she's repeating the same thing over and over again. "Please tell me he's not in hell. Please tell me he's not in hell." To the point where she screamed, "Please tell me he's not in hell." You know what I wanted to tell her? I wanted to tell her what she wanted to hear. But I couldn't. Because it would have been contrary to my authoritative Bible that makes me understand that when the Bible and I disagree, the Bible is correct. Okay. I grew up in hillbilly culture. Now, I have to explain it because I grew up in the inner city. But during the 1930s, I'm born in 1950s, 1930s, you had what they called the hillbilly dispersion. Our vice president writes about it in his book, Hillbilly Elegy. Folks from all over the Appalachians, hills of the Appalachians, moved throughout the Midwest to big towns looking for factory jobs. And this had happened so much in Indianapolis. There was a whole section of the inner city that was called Little Kentucky. And my parents were from Kentucky, and that's what happened. They moved there. My dad got a job in a steel factory. And even though you were in the inner city and surrounded by the inner city, in that neighborhood, it was like being in the hills of Kentucky. They were hillbillies, had their own distinct culture, their own distinct ideas about right and wrong, etc. One of the essence of the hillbilly culture, anybody does anything to you, you do something worse to them. You don't call the police. Somebody steals from you, you steal something bigger from them. Anybody hits you, you hit them harder. That was hillbilly, Hatfields and McCoys. You all heard the story. My parents actually came from the area that the McCoys lived in. Were reasonably close neighbors. I couldn't tell you if my dad got involved in it. He was the right age. I was born when he was older to have been in the Hatfield-McCoy feud, which involved lots of other people outside the clan. But that I couldn't tell you, but he had the same mentality. I was raised with that. Literally. First day of kindergarten. I'm 5. Okay? I'm ready to go to kindergarten for the first time. My father sits me down, tells me I'm going to be around all people of all kinds of different backgrounds and attitudes, and gives me what he considers to be wise advice. He says 90% of all fights are won by the person that throws the first punch. So you want to be the person that throws the first punch if there's a conflict. That was my advice as a kindergartner. Many years later, I'm listening to my wife get my son ready to go to the first day of kindergarten, and I tell you, the advice was just dramatically different. But I'm just raised that way. And I get saved when I'm 10. In high school, I wanted to live for the Lord. And so to me, living for the Lord meant I don't smoke, I don't drink, I'm not immoral. Okay? I got through my teenage years without any of those problems. But somehow, I never got a hold of this forgive your enemies business. It's not that I rejected it. I didn't even think about it. Okay? It's not until I'm in Bible college. And at Bible college, I punched a guy for being an idiot. He was an idiot. But I punched him in the hallway and had him down on the ground, prepared to further teach him lessons in good manners. And I get tackled by a professor. Guy really was an idiot, let me say in my defense. But I get tackled by a professor. I'm going to the dean of students' office. The dean of students, they could have expelled me, but they didn't because they knew the guy had said something horrible. But he explained to me, he said, you don't get to live like this as a preacher. There's 16 qualifications in the Word of God for being a pastor. One of them literally is no striker. He said, your entire life in ministry, you're going to meet people that deserve to be punched. But said, you can't punch them if you want to be the man of God. Boy, that's brand new information. Never thought about it before. 3 times in the Bible it says, vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. I had to ask God to help me with that. You know, that was so ingrained in me, and I haven't punched anybody since I was in my early 20s. I still will think that way. I think this is one of those people that deserve to be punched. But what would you think of me if I went around doing that? Okay? I want to be the man of God. This is my point. The Bible and I in this area have not agreed. Now, let me be real clear. I understand I'm the one that's wrong. I have an authoritative Bible that tells me what to believe, what to do, that the authority is greater than me. Well, you pick up, we just left off reading, and verse 17, they shall say unto them that despise me, the Lord hath said, ye shall have peace. They shall say, every one that walketh after the imagination of his own heart, no evil shall come upon you. So they'll tell people that sin is godly. Who hath stood in the counsel of the Lord and hath perceived and heard his word? Who hath marked his word and heard it? And you go on and explain about these folks that they run with their own message. Okay? Drop down with me if you would. And we will go to verse 29. Is not my word like as a fire, saith the Lord, like a hammer that breaketh a rock in pieces? Therefore, behold, I'm against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words. You know what it said they did? It said they steal my words, every one from his neighbor. To get around where they disagree with the Bible, they literally take words out of the Bible. Or you drop down to verse 36. And the burden of the Lord shall ye mention no more, for every man's word shall be his burden. For ye have perverted the words of the living God, the Lord of hosts, our God. They'll pervert the words of God. God will not be the authority. They'll be the authority. They'll even produce Bibles that are designed to say what they want to say. And you'll see this. There's a host of English Bibles available today, translated by preachers that believe salvation is by works, that have ruined many of the verses about salvation by faith to make it sound like they're talking about salvation by works. That's perverted. Or they'll take words out. Let me just give you one example of this, how important it is. And I'm pastoring inner city Chicago. One Sunday morning, I look out, young couple in the church for the very first time. They're in their early 20s. They both just graduated from a college in Louisiana. They both graduated in the same field. They've both been hired by the same company in Chicago. So they just moved to Chicago. They are a dating couple. The young lady grew up in an independent Baptist church in Michigan. And she's saved. Her boyfriend's not saved. She really wants him to get saved. She's encouraged him to go to church. She looks in the phone book in Indianapolis, or in Chicago rather, and whole north side of Chicago, there are 2 independent Baptist churches. So we were one of them. They come there. She's been trained away from the King James Bible. Nobody can understand it. It turns people off. It drives people away. When I get up and preach out of the King James Bible, she immediately apologizes to the young man for taking him to a church with a King James authoritative Bible. He said, no, I kind of liked it. He said, why? She reported to me, his exact words were, why should I go to a church that tells me what I already think? I said, what's the point in going? And so they continued to come to church. And after a few weeks, he gets saved. He gets baptized. He's excited about the Lord. They're coming to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and they're doing great. They're great church members. They're a blessing to us. After a few months, they break up as a couple for whatever reason. They're still coming to church, still being faithful. And finally he says, you know, this is kind of awkward. And he says, I think I'm going to move back home, California. Can you help me find a good church? And it gives me the town and all. I found him a good church. So he goes back to California. He's going to church. Girl's still coming to church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We got something special going on and we need, she's there. She's a great church member. But one Wednesday night, she says, Pastor, can I talk to you? She says, it's something that really bothers me. Sure. We sit down and she says, I've heard you preach more than once that homosexuality is a sin. I said, well, yes. And she said, I've been reading my Bible every day since I was 12. I've never seen it say homosexuality is a sin. And my immediate response was, you haven't been reading the King James Bible, have you? She said, oh no, we were told in our church never to use the King James Bible. And so we sat and we began to look at passages, and I was already familiar with this, the Bible she was using. All the passages that condemn homosexuality as a sin have been changed and fixed. So it doesn't say that anymore. Now, I did not get mad at her. I really liked her. She's a good church member. I got mad at the pastor that steered her the wrong direction. As this is what happens when we do not come to grips with this, and this is all over the place today, when we don't have an authoritative Bible, we end up making it say what we want it to say. The title, if I'm not mistaken, that Pastor used for this, God's eternal word. We've got to come to grips with this. We have an authoritative Bible. When we disagree with the Bible, we're wrong. We have an authoritative Bible. When the Bible disagrees with that which is popular in our world is wrong. We have an authoritative Bible. And that is the ultimate challenge of the day. Do we have an authoritative Bible or not? And if you have an authoritative Bible, will you have the discipline to live by what it teaches, regardless of how you feel? Right. Y'all got it? That was their challenge back then. That's our challenge right now. Do you have an authoritative Bible? You sure ought to, and you sure should treat it like that. And we'll get to that in the morning service. God bless y'all, and thank y'all.